Good evening. Thank you all for coming. Welcome to this Policy in a Pint event, which is the first of hopefully a series, engaging diverse communities, a dialogue about structures and social change. I am Tiffany Muller-Myrdal. I'm the Junior Ruth Wynne Woodward Chair in the Department of Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies at SFU. And part of the mandate of the RWW Chair is community outreach and engagement. So I interpreted this mandate as an opportunity to bring together change makers who are often in an implicit but indirect conversation about the processes and challenges of enacting social change. So I'm going to provide just about 5 minutes in the way of framing the event, but I also want to acknowledge the Coast Salish territories upon which we are located. And for me, this acknowledgement and taking that acknowledgement seriously means considering how our location, our complicity with, and our resistance to the colonial present frames our understanding of social change activism. So I'd also like to thank the Department of Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies for their support of my somewhat crazy, hopefully really successful idea of having a policy in a pint. As well as Amjo Hall and the Van City Office of Community Engagement for partnering on this event and making the space available and the videotaping possible. So the event, the panel will be videotaped and it will be archived on the SFU Woodward site. And most of all, I would like to thank the panelists, most of whom I have only just met this evening, and for their willingness to participate and come out for the evening. So before I introduce the panelists and hand the floor over, I want to provide some brief context and offer a framework for the dialogue. Although I'm a newcomer to Vancouver and to the local articulation of the politicized social change processes that are specific to Vancouver, the issues and questions that I've asked the panelists to speak to tonight are deeply personal for me. My professional trajectory started out in the NGO sector, where I first learned to balance direct service work with quantifiable outcomes. My next move was to policy school, which troubled me in its drive to simplify the complexity of social life in order to develop measures to address inequality. In the policymaking sector, this is perceived as a necessity, sometimes referred to as the quote-unquote Dow Jones averages approach to policymaking, identifying things that work most of the time. The tension here, to my mind, is that a lot of the things that become programmed leave under-theorized the systemic violence that policies and programs are meant to address. Now, as an academic, my situation is one of privileged distance in many ways, and it offers me to take the opportunity to have a wider view, if you will, on social change than either policy development or program delivery afforded. As a feminist urban geographer, I'm especially interested to understand for whom enactments of social change work and where they fail. To name one example from work that I've done on questions of sexuality and social inclusion, I could point to gay villages, Davie Village or Church in Wellesley in Toronto. As an idea, the gay village meets a particular need. Arguably, it attracts and serves not just a particular population, but also a specific articulation of identity politics. For some, the existence of a gay village demonstrates an arrival, a level of social acceptance and accompanying built environment to illustrate this point. For others, the gay village is notable most for its commodification of one identity and the exclusion of many other bodies and forms of queer social difference. So the gay village in both idea and function is a contested one. Many other such policies, even those that come out of participatory dialogue or similar strategy touted as democratic and transparent, inevitably sit in tension with a host of challenges. For one, the pace and culture of bureaucracy tends to encourage stasis rather than change. Second, the effects of good programming tend to exceed any capacity for evaluation and measurement. And third, policies sometimes go the way of good intentions. The policy or intention becomes a substitute for action itself. For me, the questions that require our attention are, what do we do with these tensions, right? They're not going to go away, so what do we do with them, and how can we use the tension in productive ways? Meaningful social change requires us to sit with both successes and the elements of processes that come up short to find new ways of encounter and practice. So I'm really excited to hear the panelists' thoughts on successes and constraints of social change making. I've asked the panelists to consider a series of questions, some general and some that are specific to their organizational context. And so each of the panelists will have 10 minutes to speak to these questions and however they interpret them. Following this, we will open the dialogue up across the panel and with the audience and welcome brief comments and questions. So we're going to start not in the order of the panel, but I've asked Councillor Reimer to start. So Councillor Reimer from the City of Vancouver. Then we'll go to Stephen Eastman, who is a representative of the Urban Aboriginal Peoples Advisory Committee. Dave Doig is from the Vancouver Foundation, and will speak next. Anthony Meza-Wilson is from Purple Thistle. And Iris, I want to say Marion Young.
I know.
Iris Young Pearson.
I get her emails. It's so ridiculous.
Iris Young Pearson from PeerNet BC. And sadly, Hawa Mire from Leave Out Violence BC has had to cancel and sends her apologies. And Lillian Eastman as well, perhaps is lost and looking for this building. But if not, I'm going to send regrets on her behalf. So thank you very much for listening, and welcome Andrea Reimer.
Well, thank you very much, Tiffany and Em. I also wanted to thank you for allowing us to have this space today, and to both of you also for a very heartfelt acknowledgement of First Nations title and rights over their unceded traditional territories that we're meeting on today, and echo those thoughts and acknowledgements. So my name's Andrea Reimer. It's funny, when you were talking and I was thinking about engagement and barriers to engagement, having a title like Councillor Reimer and sort of creates that barrier. So you're welcome to call me Andrea. Think of me as Andrea, because it's how I think of myself in rooms like this and pretty much every room I'm in. So I think I might follow Tiffany's patterning a bit, because I think it's helpful for you to get a sense of who I think I am, at least. I mean, that's all the story any of us can tell. Just a brief bio kind of history. I've had many jobs, sat on many boards, but I think that the sort of sum total of it is as a community organizer, and this is something I learned extremely young. When I was about 3, apparently, in my preschool, they served raisins, which I found of substandard quality. And as children might do, you refuse the raisins and nothing actually changes in the world. But in my case, I managed to convince my fellow preschoolers to have a nap in. And we refused to leave our little mats until the raisins changed. And as a result of this, things changed. They got rid of the raisins. They brought in peanuts. This was before, I'm dating myself now, but this was before peanut allergies and all of that. And it sounds incredibly silly, but I, although my mother insists I was born an organizer and an advocate, it really was quite a pivotal moment in an experience. And you think back, I mean, you're all here tonight because you have an interest in community organizing and how communities make change. And really that key moment in your life when you found out that, yeah, you can sit there and write the letter and, yell and scream and have the sign, but it's really when you manage to engage others in that effort that you are successfully changing things. And not only that, when you stop saying that you're speaking for community and in fact are part of a community and you're raising your voices together. So that's sort of my background and the perspective I bring. I know there are politicians and elected officials who bring to the job an idea that because they're elected, they have the right to decide. There's another school of thought that I actually think is much more prevalent in some kinds of government, hopefully increasingly more prevalent. And the idea is that because you've elected this government, you now have the right to participate and to be involved in the decisions that are made. So I was asked to speak today to the advisory committees at the city. The history, so I'm going to cover off history and sort of meta themes around advisory committees, as well as some of the barriers to those advisory committees sort of actualizing this perfect level of engagement that we imagine is possible, and some of the ways that we've tried to address those, as well as where the gaps still remain. So the history, which I tried to, so here's a barrier and a gap. There is no history of advisory committees in the city of Vancouver. I did manage to dig up some fragments, but I was unable to get a coherent history around this. Having been part of much of the modern history of it, I can speak from that experience. But suffice it to say that the best I could do was tell you that there actually was one advisory committee that has existed since the City of Vancouver was founded, and that is the Vancouver City Planning Commission, which was set up before cities had planning departments. There was a group of citizens whose job it was to input into city decisions around planning. Over time, I mean, so you're talking 126 years ago, if you sort of fast forward to the 60s and 70s, there was a great demand from citizens to be more engaged in decision making. And bearing in mind, if you look at pictures of the Planning Commission up until the, well, almost until the modern era, it's the dominant culture speaking to the dominant culture about what the dominant culture is worried about, right? So in the 60s and 70s, you saw a great push from the people who weren't represented in those discussions, women, so 51% of the population, people of color, people who didn't have university education, renters, which have always been the majority in Vancouver and continue to be the majority, pushing a bit to get into those discussions. So as a result of that, successive governments set up task forces, or the equivalent of a time-limited, very outcome-oriented group of people, which generally were more diverse, but again, the dominant section, so they might have women, but they're women with university degrees who own property, who own businesses, who have Scottish last names, which is a highly dominant theme in the written history of Vancouver. And those people may or may not have suggested to the government of the day that they continue to exist as a body. The ones that successfully made that advocacy became advisory committees, permanent advisory committees. Others apparently weren't so bold, or the government, often what happened is the task force reports out right before an election. The next government might not be as inclined to accept the recommendations. So if you sort of go through all that history, around the 90s, you started to see civil society bringing forward court cases based on the scant laws that exist to protect social, environmental, and other rights in the country. And that led to some permanent advisory committees that are essentially mandated through either precedents legally or actually are mandated by federal or provincial law. So some of the examples of that would be the Persons with Disabilities Committee. We have an Equal Employment Opportunity Office that comes and goes with advisory committees directly attached to it in the city, and those cannot leave. The Library Board is something that exists as a result of the provincial government. We have in total 30 existing advisory committees in the city of Vancouver, as well as 2 task forces in the mayor's office right now. So that's a pretty substantial number that involves over 400 people in the city of Vancouver who volunteer their time on those advisory committees, including Stephen, who you're going to hear from in a few minutes. So you go through all that history. In the 2000s, we had the election of a government. I'm trying to stay away from partisan because I'm assuming you're here to hear as much as possible information as opposed to a political opinion, although you're welcome to ask me later about that. In the 2000s, we had the election of a government and an expectation of citizens. Remember that YouTube actually did not exist in 2002 when this particular government that I'm talking about was elected, but rising amounts of interaction between citizens, both and when I say citizens, I mean residents. We have a ton of residents who are not citizens and still deserve a very active voice in the decisions that are made in the city. So residents are getting together, they're talking, they're organizing, and this particular government felt that they should have a direct spot in city government. So that's when we saw the first sort of formal voices for the LGBTQ community, persons with disabilities obviously stayed, multicultural advisory committee. We saw, a grouping of what we call the demographic advisory committees at the city that came together. Unfortunately, the government changed in the mid-2000s, and much of the work, the formative work, and I don't know what Stephen's going to talk about, but as of the newest advisory committee in the city, and as someone who's chaired an advisory committee, the Food Policy Council, which was one of the legacies of that 2002 government, it is really tough. It is really, how many of you sit on a board or have volunteered with an organization or something like, okay, so you get in a room with 12 people you've never met before or don't know that well, and you have to talk about how are we going to do our work and who needs to be in the room and who's going to take the minutes. So all that stuff takes a long time. Forget making advice on policy, right? So these are challenges. And when those advisory committees stopped and then had to start again, all of that work had to start all over again, which was difficult, but I think we've come through the other side of it now with reinstatement. In 2008, the government that I'm part of was elected. We reinstated every advisory committee that had been removed, many of which, thanks, Tiffany, many of which are the demographic ones. So we now have a multicultural advisory committee, a women's advisory committee, one of the only ones in Canada, which I find kind of astounding, urban Aboriginal Peoples Advisory Committee, where we're actually behind much of Western Canada in regards to that. We have an Arts and Culture Policy Council. I'm not going to speak to all 30, but you get the picture that there's a fairly broad range there. The last thing I wanted to leave you with was some challenges around quantity and quality. So with 30 advisory committees, obviously the issues of who's not represented on these who do we not have an advisory committee for is an issue, but also who is on those advisory committees. On the demographic side, so the multicultural committee, we have really excellent ethnic participation there. We don't have great ethnic participation on the other advisory committees, so on the Women's Advisory Committee or the LGBTQ Advisory Committee. We did manage the second round in 2011. We put a call out and got over 800 applications. It was, by order of magnitude, by far the largest application intake we've ever done, and that was working through partners in the community. But even at that, it was difficult to ensure that there was adequate, in my opinion, adequate diversity on all the committees. We do now have 52% women on every single committee in the city of Vancouver that the council appoints. But we do have committees that are appointed by external agencies. They appoint some of them, and they're largely development and planning committees, and almost entirely men are appointed to those by external agencies. I have nothing against men, but obviously with 51% of the population being women, there must be women out there who have important, compelling, and meaningful contributions to make to the city's planning and development. The last thing I would say is around the quality. Can they make change? Anyone who tells me that they speak for the community immediately makes it difficult for me to hear them, because I sure don't speak for the community, and I have never met anyone who's capable of representing in any statement the diversity, complexity, and lived experience of any community. Even a community of 12 people is hard to represent, let alone one of 650,000 with the diversity that we have. So figuring out how people can understand others' lived experience to the point that they need to be able to represent themselves in a meaningful way in a conversation with that person is very challenging, and providing that space as a city is something that we've really been working on. We do have a council of councils now where we bring all of our councils together so that women are considering issues of the LGBTQ community and the urban Aboriginal and the arts and policy and the food and how everyone's thinking about different issues, and hopefully through raising understanding, we're able to raise the quality of the decisions that are being made, which affect people no matter what gender, what color, what lived experience that they're bringing into the equation. I would also say that there are things that will necessarily never be done by the City of Vancouver. As I think was mentioned, governments are, I can't quite remember the word, it was actually unusually complimentary in its attempt to talk about how static we are as an institution. I'm forgetting the word, but thank you for being polite about that. Government at its base, you depend on it to provide a very stable, predictable level of service. You want to know in the morning that the tap is going to turn on, toilet's going to flush, nothing bad's going to happen in your bathroom, that the bus is going to show up in or around the time the schedule said that it was going to show up. Yes, guidelines. They should be called transit guidelines. So an organization that is very good at providing those kinds of stable, predictable services and has the staff that are very good at that is not, by definition, going to be fabulous at innovation and nimble moving. So figuring out how to merge those cultures has been a challenge for us with some of the agendas that we have around change. But I think to allow the community the opportunity to go out and be nimble and be flexible and figure out how to respond to those challenges, that isn't necessarily going to happen in government. So an example I was talking about with Tiffany before we started was the Women's Advisory Committee, who provides excellent policy advice in an ongoing way, but has also birthed an organization called Women Transforming Cities that has gone out and has its own life now. And it's sort of like, if you think of the Women's Advisory Committee as the soil that was sort of birthed out of, and now it's able to develop a life of its own, develop larger, bigger, more innovative ideas and bring them back to a hopefully receptive city that can implement those policies. So thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Hello. Thank you for having me here today. So I'm Stephen Eastman. I'm co-chair of the Urban Aboriginal People's Advisory Committee for Vancouver City Council. A very long title, so I might refer to it as UAPAC. That's kind of how we save time in our meetings. So I got involved with the advisory committee in about June of last year. So like Andrea was saying, brand new advisory committee to the city, and what attracted me to it was that it gave us a chance to give urban Aboriginal peoples a voice in policy making. And that's a lot of what we've been seeing as missing. So there's been a lot of policy councils and policy bodies, and they always have been talking with either Chief and Council of BC First Nations, and they have a lot of great things to say, or they talk to service providers, and a lot of the times it's executive directors of service providers. And while they're providing great services for the people, the community, we've always found that there's a bit of a disconnect between those EDs and the people on the front lines. So one of the things that this advisory committee has given us the ability to do is be able to bridge those gaps, be able to start to give us some influence into policy council. So we're still in the process of trying to get in there and trying to really make sure that our voice is being heard as an urban Aboriginal peoples, because even just within the city of Vancouver, there's 12,000 urban Aboriginal people that are not being represented. And if you look at Metro Vancouver, 40,000 urban Aboriginal peoples. One of the councils that we've been trying to sit on, and we've been coming up to a bit of a brick wall, because the current structure is that it's Chief and Council that chooses who's going to sit on that particular council. It's the BC First Nations Child and Family Wellness Council. And we can't officially sit on the council. We can attend meetings because we're not Chief and Council. We're just urban Aboriginal peoples. And what they always like to say is, that out of all the children in care in BC, 51% of those children are Aboriginal. But what I feel is very important to finish that sentence is that 86% of those children live in an urban setting. And so you have all these children that are in care, and it's great that we are having that conversation with the province and with the federal government about how do we better improve the lives of our children and family in those situations. But we have to make sure that the majority of where those people are living, that we're having that kind of a representation as well. So I was asked to talk about some of the challenges that we've had as an advisory committee, as well as some of our successes. And we're still quite new, so we're still working through that whole process. And I'd say at this point we've had more challenges than successes so far, but it's because we're still so new. One of the biggest ones I'd say is just learning what the policy is. There's so much policy out there that coming together in June of last year is our meetings so far. We've been having them. We were only supposed to have 4 meetings a year, but we've been having monthly meetings just because we've been trying to catch up on what's already happening, getting to know what services are available, what policies are in place, what the city can do, what the city can't do, and trying to wade through all of that. The other thing that we've noticed is just the bureaucratic process. It takes a while for policy and change to happen. And so we've been learning slowly what that looks like and how do we make sure that we can overcome that and move forward. And of course, one of the other big challenges is being a brand new advisory committee, never having anyone sit on this committee before, because we were the first, is just to bring together people and have an idea. We have an advisory committee of 12 people, and everyone's from diverse backgrounds, and that's great to be able to bring lots of different ideas to the floor. But when you're talking about urban Aboriginal issues, it's a very, very, very wide, broad topic. And so what we've decided to do is to do a series of community forums so that we can really ensure that we are representing the people of Vancouver, the urban Aboriginal people of Vancouver, that we're not just assuming that we know what the population wants and giving advice to City Council in that regard. So what we've been working on right now is trying to get out and partner with organizations that are already out there and doing that work. I've had meetings with the LAP, so the Downtown Eastside planning process, Grandview Woodlands, as well as Canby Corridor is coming up in this year, and I've been asked to sit on an advisory group for the Pearson Dogwood redevelopment. So we're trying to get out there, trying to get our voice out there, just trying to let people know that we exist and they can come to us with information. And so that's one of the challenges, but we've been moving forward and moving past it. And actually, just Andrea also mentioned about the council to council, and that was one thing that I had asked for early on and was pushing Andrea to have us do, is be able to bring at least the chairs and co-chairs together of the different advisory committees so we can make sure that we're collaborating on issues that we're both trying to tackle. And so we've started some of those conversations, and we're continuing to build upon that. And it's been helpful to have that open communication between the advisory committees, because what I heard from previous chairs is that that's never been the case, and it was even hard just to get somebody else's email from another council. So it's been great to be able to have that open communication as well. So I think one of the biggest things that we've just been able to do is gain that sense of validity within different policy levels. And that's really where I see the biggest success, is that even in just 7 months of being around, is that we've been able to represent urban Aboriginal peoples at different levels of government like we've never been able to before. There's a lot of disconnected and urban Aboriginal peoples with their home reserves. There's a lot of displaced people within Vancouver. And so we want to make sure that they have an opportunity to ensure that policy is thinking about them as well. And that we have some of the most marginalized peoples, as we know, in the Downtown East Side, but also that we're representing people from every neighborhood of Vancouver. And that's been one of the things that we've been really pushing for, is that we want to recognize that there's urban Aboriginal people living everywhere. And some people in certain positions don't recognize that. We've been having talks. In one of my other hats, I also am coordinating what's called the Gen 7 project. So we're working with 5 Aboriginal youth to get them into community centres as employees, and we've trained them in partnership with Motivate Canada to lead a sports and recreation program that's Aboriginal focused, as well as healthy lifestyle focused and healthy living focused. The idea is that we want to start bringing Aboriginal peoples into the community centres. There's a large barrier that people tend to have, that we've found that people have with just accessing those services, either because it's too expensive or because they don't feel comfortable, any number of reasons. So we're looking at how can we ensure that there is a safe, comfortable space for urban Aboriginal peoples to be in community centres, at the same time giving our youth the opportunity to work for the city, which is just a great opportunity that they actually get into the pool, but also gain leadership skills on being able to start to build community, because I've found sometimes community centers always forget the first half of their name. A lot of them act as centers for recreation, not necessarily as centers for building on community. So I think that's also another great opportunity that we have for our urban Aboriginal peoples. And the reason I wanted to mention this is because when we were starting this project, there was an all-presidents meeting of the Parks Board, and some of the presidents said, well, we don't have Aboriginal people living in our community. And if you look at the last census, there's Aboriginal people in every single neighborhood in the city. And so we're saying, like, we're here to work with you, work together, move forward, and see how we can move forward in a good place. And I look forward to your questions, and thank you for coming out tonight.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Sorry, everyone at work is sick, and so I have the little cough and sniffle as well. Try not to get it in the way. My name's Dave Doig. It sounds much nicer with a Scottish accent than what I can say it with. I'm a director of granting at Vancouver Foundation, and so I was asked tonight to come and talk about how a funding organization gets involved in social change, and where some of our successes have been, and where some of the challenges are that we put up. I'm going to try to speak using technology, which makes me current. It's the social change that I'm involved with now. It may fail dismally, however, so we'll try it. So Vancouver Foundation is a community foundation, and our vision is one of livable, healthy, vibrant communities. That's what we're really working towards. And to us, social change really starts in the community. So it's individuals and organizations collaborating together to identify and address the issues that are a priority to them. So we don't set the agenda. We go out and ask the individuals and organizations to really, what's important to you? What do you want to see change? Because we believe social change is that vital catalyst needed in order to acknowledge and address and articulate some of those really long-standing issues that we continue to face. And there's a voice for professional experts, but there's also a voice for people with lived experience. And that's where we see a value in social change. So in general, Vancouver Foundation supports growth and innovation through project-based grants to allow initiatives that are community self-directed. See, I don't even know what we do. Vancouver Foundation supports growth and innovation through project-based grants for new initiatives that are community self-directed and lead to measurable and sustainable impact. There's a lot of success wrapped up in there. But just saying that paragraph, I'm sure you can identify where a bunch of barriers are as well, and we'll get to them in just a moment. So social change to us is also positioned a little downstream. It's what we need to move to, and so we work to support projects that help us move downstream. Grants is one way we do this, but it's not the only way we do this. So Vancouver Foundation is a great convener. We bring stakeholders together around a variety of issues to talk about the work that can be done. We bring those stakeholders together to bring voice to issues that don't get a lot of airtime. So, for example, the lived experiences of refugee youth in Vancouver. Not something you hear about a lot. Sometimes these convening events turn into bigger events. And so our youth homelessness initiative started out as a convening exercise for us and then turned into one of our strategic priorities and also led to a whole bunch of new projects and new initiatives, much like the advisory committees did at the city. So Street to Home organization is a completely new organization that grew out of just talking about the issue about what we need to do downstream to address youth homelessness. And sometimes we just draw public attention to an issue that we feel is important, but we can't address alone. So last year we undertook a Metro Vancouver-wide survey around the levels that residents felt around connection and engagement to families and friends, their neighbors, and to civic life in general. And there were some really quite startling results that came out of that survey that suggest areas of urgent social change are needed, but we recognize we can't do it alone. And so we try to make the issue as widely known as possible, and we invite individuals and organizations to join with us to address these issues. So there's a lot of good things to say about the work that we do. Having said this, our grantee procedures, our corporate structure, our cultural values, our history, they all introduce unintended structural changes to social change. And so I'm just going to briefly tell you about some of these. And so let me tell you a bit more about who we are and where we came from. So Canada Revenue Agency defines a community foundation as an organization established to manage a community endowment fund, the income from which is distributed to registered charities within a community. That's the legal definition, and that's what we do. We manage endowment funds. In fact, Vancouver Foundation started in 1943 with one gift from one woman with one vision. So a secretary named Alice McKay left $1,000 in her will with the instructions that the $1,000 be invested and the interest from that investment be used to support projects that helped low-income women. That story got out in the Vancouver Sun, and industrial, high-level profile industrial at the time, Van Dusen, you might have heard of him, was so inspired that he contributed $10,000 and challenged 9 of his friends to do the same. And so that year, a $1,000 gift from a secretary no one had heard from leveraged an additional $100,000 from 10 industrialists who everyone had heard from, and that started the Vancouver Foundation with that one endowment fund. It's an amazing story, and what's really amazing is that $1,000 still generates interest today, still supports projects that address the needs of low-income women. It's still having an impact, and that's great news. 70 years later, we manage more than 1,400 funds, and since 1943 have received about $680 million in donations and have given away about $671 million in grants and distributions. And other than the government of BC, we have been the greatest supporter of nonprofits in BC since 1943. It's a staggering, tremendous accomplishment. And so where's the barrier in that? Well, I think one of the biggest barriers is the endowment fund themselves. And so endowment funds are established mostly by people who say, I want to support this organization and I want to support this issue. And I want to do that in perpetuity, which means forever. And so think back to the 1940s, the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Think about the issues that people thought about then that were important. So one of the practical challenges we have is the fact that things change. And so we have a fund that was set up early on to support an organization to find the cure for polio. Now what do we do? Also, think about the language that people used back then to describe social issues. There's a real ethical challenge for us. We've got lots of funds that are meant to help the retarded, the crippled, the wayward, the destitute, the drug abusers. You talked about the gay village in Church and Wellesley. Think about how just the language that was acceptable for society used to describe gay men, how that's changed from the 1940s, from deviant and perverts to homosexual to gay to part of what's now the queer community. Lots of social changes happened in a very short period of time. It's very challenging for us to fund social change of today and tomorrow based on money that was established decades ago. We also have corporate values, and every organization does. City of Vancouver does. We all do. And I'm very proud of the values that, oh crap, this only took 7.5 minutes when I practiced it. Boy, was I wrong. I'm proud of the values we bring to our work. So innovative, responsive, fair. We strive to behave in an honest, open, transparent way. But there's another value we have. We're effective. And so we look for projects that are focused. And I want to read you our value statement. Our work is focused and efficient and provides value for money. Does that sound like social change to you? We also look for impact. So our work needs to make measurable, sustainable impact in the communities we serve. And that's not always easy with social change. Finally, there's our granting procedures. And so I'm very proud. One of the successes we have to social change is we're a broad-based funder. Across BC, it's an open process. Anyone can submit a proposal against any organization for any issue. We fund in arts and culture, in health, in education, in environment. We're all over the map, which is great because we cast this wide net for drawing in lots of ideas around social change. And so the problem to that, of course, is we encourage you to develop new, innovative, out-of-the-box ideas and then require you to fit that idea into one of our neat little granting streams. Is it environment? Is it education? Is it health? You need to help us decide, because that's the history of our funds. So some good news and some challenges. 2011, we made more than 3,800 grants, totaling more than $41 million. That's an impressive amount. So there's some barriers to that, though. One was that you need to fit into the box in order to get a grant. We have community-advised process, so we work with leaders from across the province to help us assess and make decisions. And I think we've got diversity around those tables. I think we've got gender, we've got age, we've got geography, and even then, it's not an objective procedure. Who sits around the table makes a big difference. One of our priorities is Aboriginal education. We have Aboriginal advisors around the table. We have non-Indigenous people around the table helping us make the decision. But the truth is, it's not an Aboriginal-led process. We're making decisions about Aboriginal education, but it's not an Aboriginal-led process. And that's becoming more and more of a problem. The other big problem we face as a community foundation, and all community foundations face this, so all of that money we have is not discretionary granting. So that $41 million that gave out, most of it came from donor-advised fund holders themselves. They decide where the money goes. Agencies also park their endowment funds with us to pool it with other money. They can invest their money at much lower cost if they do it with us. That money goes out. It's predetermined. We only granted about $7 million through our community streams in 2011 out of that $41 million. And $7 million over 9 fields of interest and 5 other special projects is not a lot of money. It's not a substantial impact money. So it's equally challenged when we received $53 million worth of requests that year. So a lot of social change goes unfunded just because of the way the money is structured and the application process and the way money flows out from foundations. So in conclusion, thank you for more than 2 minutes. I think Vancouver Foundation, well-intentioned, well-run, well-positioned as a community foundation to really help support and move social change. Having said that, there's things about us that get in the way. Our values, our history, our process. There's no denying that our obligations to fund holders present barriers to social change advocates. And so I look forward to discussing what some of the potential solutions to this might be. Thanks very much.
Hello, my name is Anthony Meza-Wilson. I'm with the Purple Thistle Center. And before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we're here on the unceded lands of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam people. And thanks for having me here. I'd like to just also say that I'm not used to this format of like panel audience. At the Thistle, we sit in circles, and so this sort of dichotomy of observers and participants versus the presenters is something that's a little bit foreign to me. So bear with me, as well as the technology. I've got paper and pen here. So So what the Thistle is, we are a youth-run arts and activism resource center located in East Vancouver for the last 12 or so years. I am actually relatively new to the Thistle. I'm the co-director as of January 2013, along with Carla Bergman, who's fantastic and phenomenal. But I should say that just because I don't have a full picture of what the Thistle is. I've been organizing at the Purple Thistle for the past 2 years. But in terms of this new role that I have, which is going to be interacting with granting agencies and working in the community, this is really my first sort of official capacity in that way. So the Thistle is, if anyone's ever been there, it's over on Vernon and Clark. It's a center in a big lime green building, and it's full of amazing things that are put together by a collective of youth and has been since its inception. The Purple Thistle is run collectively by a group, youth being 15 to 25-year-old folks generally, and they make all the decisions about what happens in the space on a day-to-day basis, on a month-to-month basis. They set the budgets, they decide who mentors are, they decide what programs are going to happen, and quite a bit does happen in the space. We have community gardens, including a new food forest garden down in the False Creek Flats. We also have screen printing facilities. We have a variety of workshops that happen on a regular basis, including the Purple Thistle Institute, which is a wonderful new alternative to the university that's been happening for the past couple of years. And all of these are projects that are put together by the young people who use the space. And that's a foundational concept for what the Purple Thistle is. We want radical engagement, not just empowerment of youth, but to have actually the youth in control of everything that's happening. As such, myself as a director, I do spend time in the Thistle, but I'm not there running the meetings or anything like that. Sometimes I go to collective meetings, sometimes I don't. So we really, really want to focus on being able to give young people the support that they need to be able to make their dreams come true, to make their projects become reality with as little, we've been talking a lot about barriers. We want as few barriers as possible. We find that young people thrive. They have tons of energy and enthusiasm and resilience and creativity and an immense drive to make the world a better place and to work on all these projects. All they need is the resources with which to do it. And we try to do that with like a minimum of bureaucracy, which can be a challenge, right? Because we do depend on grants to pay our rent. We do depend on all kinds of things. So, it's incredible the work that does get done, though. I think of the food forest garden as a really great example. Just in the past 2 years, if you go down to the end of, I believe it's William, down by the train tracks, there's a garden there that's fruit trees, nut trees, berry bushes, and this is something that has been put together by a group of youth over the past 2 years. They've been working really hard. We broke ground in June of 2011, and it's a fantastic project. One barrier that project has been facing, and I don't know the status of this at this point. Maybe Andrea knows a bit more. Is the status of like the Malkin connector going through? It not only is our garden threatened, but also the Strathcona and Cottonwood gardens, which are very old, well-established community gardens, have been threatened as well. Those sorts of larger movements of the city and of capital and of resources, those kinds of things can come to affect us as well. And so we think about those larger forces in a way where we're trying to find our little ecological niche in East Vancouver. Some things are in our control and some are out, right? So I think about the proposed redevelopment plan of the False Creek Flats, which may have a pretty large impact on the Purple Thistle as well. We don't know what it means for us yet, but we hear whispers of rezoning and daylighting creeks, which would be cool. But those sorts of things really impact us. I just wanted to reiterate what we're about in terms of putting young people in charge. and address maybe a few of the issues that I heard arise with the rest of the panel in regards to that concept. The idea of stability versus nimbleness, which I think is an important kind of dichotomy to think about. We at the Thistle try to be as nimble as possible, which makes us pretty unstable. But in a sense, we're able to accomplish a lot. It's really based on the energy and enthusiasm of the group that's present in the space at the time, and not a lot of sort of ongoing processes. So when you try to interface that with granting agencies that maybe don't change for 30 or 40 years, or forms of bureaucracy, it can be a challenge. We do really think that nimbleness, from our perspective as a grassroots organization, is really, really essential for keeping, particularly a space that's interested in arts and activism. We're working for social justice, we're working with creativity. Those are things that definitely need to be changing on a regular basis and need to be renewed and refreshed. Stephen spoke a bit about making community centers about community. I often think of the Thistle as much like the community centers, but none of the youth that I know go to places like Britannia or even Raycam. And I think that part of that is just the institutional nature of the space. Something as simple as the lighting and the concrete blocks. But then there's also the aspect of if you want to do anything, there's either a fee or a form or something you have to fill out to make it happen. Whereas at the Thistle, you walk in the door, you talk to somebody, you say, I want to do this. Other people say that sounds like an awesome idea, and they make it happen, right? So those barriers of institutional barriers of paperwork and finance and those sorts of things, those are things that we work to eliminate as much as possible. And because, of course, the youth make the space themselves into what they want it to look like, they create the kind of space that they're comfortable in. So I don't know, that made me think of the Thistle a bit. Yeah, and I really appreciated Dave's words on community self-direction in terms of granting. That's exactly the same concept that we're working with at the Purple Thistle is the idea of community self-direction, really building a space where young people can work on the projects they're interested in. They're able to do those things. So maybe I could say a bit about the Thistle's commitment to social justice and to ecology. We've been working with the Purple Thistle Institute, as I mentioned before, as an alternative to the university. And in terms of some of the questions that came up earlier about engaging, I don't know if I can quite put it in. I guess it was like identities, right? Certain identities, women, people of color, indigenous people, queer people. We try as much as possible to center the experience of people from all different backgrounds. If you just let things go without any kind of conscious deliberation on the process, you're going to end up with the most dominant identities being present in your space. And I think that what we try to do at the Thistle is we try to actively encourage and cultivate a space where our collective is composed of women, of queer people, of people of color, of poor people. We don't always succeed 100%. We try, and it's an ongoing struggle. It's something that's not going to end anytime particularly soon. It's something we have to always keep working at and renewing. But that's, to me, I think there's an important distinction between having advisory groups and having a sort of central body that's composed of people who are from quote-unquote marginalized identities. This idea that our core collective, we don't have like a people of color caucus that advises our collective. It's like we're trying to get those people on the collective. And I really I feel passionate about putting people who've been traditionally marginalized in positions of as much power as possible, and we strive to do that at the Thistle, and I think we're succeeding. Thanks. To a certain degree, I think we are. It's something that we've definitely been working particularly hard at in the last 2-3 years. And part of the Purple Thistle Institute has been a portion of that. We're working on a unit on decolonization currently. We're trying to get, we've had quite a few Indigenous youth in the space recently, and yeah, I guess it's just something that's a constant struggle, and it's something that's always on our minds. I think perhaps I'll just say a few closing words. Yeah, I mean, the Thistle is, to me, it's a wonderful place. It's a place that I love being, and I think part of that is because of its unique, radical, and very, I mean, I've heard it said utopian sort of vision for transforming society, trying to you know, in a prefigurative way, build the world that we want to see right now, rather than doing reforming approaches, following through you know, bureaucratic approaches. We're trying to really make what we want to have happen now, even if it happens on a small scale. Maybe it can grow in an organic way. So yeah, that's what we're trying to do. And thanks for listening.
I'm short. Good evening, everybody. My name is Iris, and I'm from an organization called PureNet BC. I have the most awesome privilege to work in an organization that I actually was introduced to as a teenager, and I'm talking mid to early 90s. What I want to do is talk a little bit about PureNet, and I was asked to talk about some of the challenges that we have. And I felt like I might be complaining a little bit. So bear with me on that. And then we're going to talk a little bit about our successes as well. So PureNet prides itself on being able to connect communities and to build capacity within communities. We strive to work with mostly peer-led and peer support groups. And we believe that people with strong connections to others have improved health. And communities where people are connected are healthier places to live. And so we're provincially mandated, funded actually by primarily the City of Vancouver, Vancouver Coastal Health, their SMART Fund, and BC Gaming. We also have, we're on our third year of funding with Vancouver Foundation. We get to do a project called Building Inclusive Communities, which targets folks in all communities throughout BC who want to do intergenerational community projects. So we bring adults and seniors and pair them with young people to create a community project that responds to a need in their community. So we get to connect with tons of folks from various communities, and we hope that we also can reflect those communities. When we can't, we bring other folks and we partner with other folks to be able to do that. So in doing that, some of the challenges that we have are, particularly for us, because we work within a framework of peer support, which looks at three principles. The first one is that we all come as equal voices. And in order to come as equal voices, we have to recognize that we're not all equal, that we all come from different places, that some of us have more barriers to get to those places. The second piece is that we have lived experiences and we're experts in our lived experience. And then that third piece is that reciprocity, where we learn and share from our lived experiences. The second foundational framework we work on is through an anti-oppression, power and privilege lens. So we work with communities and we work with our communities understanding that they're diverse. And in doing so, we ensure that we're recognizing people that have privilege and also people who don't have privilege. Our biggest challenge around that is that not everybody has the same language. We don't share the same language around diversity. We don't share the same language around advocacy, engagement, as well as inclusion. And so one of the things that we're able to do is go in and at least have that conversation and create a safe space so that we can have that conversation. Another challenge that we have is that because we're nonprofit, we want to partner with folks, but sometimes we find that challenging in that because of our funding system, we're having to compete with each other on funding. And some of those partnerships don't happen because we're so territorial. We want to make sure that we're protecting our own funding sources. And so some of those partnerships don't happen to the best that we possibly could. We're also hugely a training organization, and so we provide facilitation training, team building, anti-discrimination training. We provide youth engagement training to various organizations and communities, and a lot of that training budget is cut, right? Because as we're seeing, because of the political climate and everything, there's different priorities set. So many of those organizations that we connect with quite regularly don't have the same funds to be able to hire us to come in. We often do it pro bono, and we figure out ways to balance that out. So that's one of our challenges as well. How do we function as sort of a training resource without getting that money to be able to do that? And one more thing around the funding system. So we all know that we're sort of pitted against each other, but the other piece of it is that we're only provided funding for new projects or short term. And one of the most amazing things, actually, is that Vancouver Foundation has been able to support us through this Building Inclusive Communities project. And because it's been 3 years, we've recognized what we didn't do so well, and we've been able to improve and increase our impact into communities throughout the years. And so we're on our final year, and we're hoping that this is the best, the best year ever for BIC. So when we talk about all of those layers of challenges, there's more complexity in that because we are literally talking about connecting. We're talking about connecting with our funders. We're talking about connecting with our stakeholders, which is the communities we serve, the peer support groups that come to us and ask for, how do I facilitate groups for folks who live with chronic pain? So we're at a really amazing place because we get to work with all of those folks, but the challenge itself is that connection piece. How do we connect better with each other? How do we trust each other better? Now I'm going to get to the successes. So because we've had these challenges, we've been able to grow a little bit. And we're not always good at doing what we set out to do. But one of the things I want to say is when I was a teenager, early 90s, I had the opportunity to be a part of Civic Youth Strategy. When it first started, when Penny Perry was the youth advocate for the city of Vancouver. And that change has been such an influential piece in my own participation in nonprofit. To see then being a part of Civic Youth Strategy, and it was about engaging young people in civic politics, but also creating a youth-friendly Vancouver, to now where they have an in-house youth social planning focused on youth, and with youth politic being actually part of the city of Vancouver, engaging young people in learning more about politics and how they can get involved. We've been able to work with that, or with Civic Youth Strategy as well, Youth Politic as well through PeerNet. So I've had this amazing opportunity to watch what started out as a first step. And they didn't always engage young people in the best way, right? Because when we talk about engagement, there's so many different levels. And they were pretty token, right, when we first started. And now to watch the youth voices and how much we're able to, and I'm not a youth anymore, so I can't say we, but how much change and how many young people are more involved in the city of Vancouver and in all of our organizations. It's such an amazing accomplishment. And that's like 16 years of my life. So it's pretty cool. Some of the things that we've been able to do as an organization is connect with far-reaching communities like Lower Post. I didn't even know there was a place called Lower Post in BC, but we've had some folks from Lower Post come out and build their own capacity around engaging with their communities. There's a larger First Nations community there, as well as a youth community that's so disengaged, and so they're trying to figure out ways to build that connection piece. to going to Port Alberni and doing the same thing. So we have a really amazing opportunity to be able to not only connect with and expand our outreach and our impact, but that we're able to build the capacity so that they can then do it. Because it isn't about that philanthropical piece, right? It's not about providing for, it's about building that capacity so that they can provide for themselves. And that's that key piece for us. What else can I tell you? So when we're talking about social change, we pride ourselves on being social change makers. It's tough, and it's hard. It's definitely hard to do. Thank you. And but one of the things that we're able to do is try to model it within ourselves. Our executive director this year is retiring. Her name is Cheryl Hewitt. She's an amazing woman, and what we've been able to do within our own organization is shift the way that leadership looks. And so we're going into a co-leadership model where my counterpart, Romy Chandra Herbert, and myself will be co-executive directors and starting that off for the first time. We're first-time executive directors. We're first-time co-leaders. So this is going to be an interesting journey. But I think that one of the things about social change is that we need to step out of our comfort zones, because our board, they didn't agree to it at first. We had to push them and show them the benefits, and also show them that it's existed before, and that there are challenges, but we need to work together to be able to do that. And I think that in order for any of us to create social change and to work on these challenges, we do need to be a little courageous. Take the first step and find somebody to do that with me or with us, right? And I think the more we're able to connect with each other to do that and work together and be honest about it, that's probably the first step that we need to do in order to create that social change. So thank you very much for having me up here. I was a little nervous, but you're awesome. So thank you.
Okay, thank you all so much for your insights, and I would like to invite you to get another beer or refresh yourself. We have a walk-around mic. Yes, thank you very much. So I would like to just open the conversation up across the panel with the audience. If you have questions, comments. Yeah, we have about 40 minutes left for more engagement. So,
or we could just drink beer.
Why are you here?
Yeah.
What did you want to get out of this?
yeah.
Should I speak with this, or
There's a mic coming. Oh, and actually, sorry, I meant to remind. If you could please speak into the mic, that way the question will be recorded for the video.
Okay, awesome. So this is a question for, is it Dave Doig? Oh, okay, Dave Doig, without the Scottish accent. So you were talking about how there was only a very small segment of funding that that the foundation allows for community development. I was curious about the other giant chunk of the, what is it, did you say, of the $48 million? Could you explain a little bit about where the rest of it went? I mean, I guess it was assuming that the donors had specified that they wanted it in specific sectors and so on.
Well, it just works if I lean into it. How about that? It's a great question, thanks. So it's not that we only have $7 million for community development. It's that the way community foundations work, we manage endowment funds. And so many families or individuals will come to us and say, I want to set up the Dave Doig Fund. And for my lifetime, I want to make decisions about, I want to be an active participant in where the money goes. I want to have impact in a specific area. And so that fund holder drives the decisions around where the money goes. And the bulk of our money is in those types of funds. We also have other types of funds where agencies, UBC for example, they have many different types of endowment funds that they've set up to fund their organization in perpetuity. They've parked some of those funds with us because they can pool those funds. And so every year we just cut those organizations a check and they use the money any way they want. What's left is now discretionary for the Vancouver Foundation to use. And so we use most of that money through our field of interest granting streams and for some of our strategic priorities. Connect and engage, youth homelessness are our two strategic priorities. And so we need to use some of that money there. We're very lucky in that some of the money that's left over is actually unrestricted. So we've done a very good job over the last decade in helping people understand how not putting conditions on their endowment fund really helps moving forward. I'm not sure how we'll help the three-legged cats that we've got the fund for moving forward. But, so the reality is in our foundation and in many community foundations, most of the money we distribute is not discretionary. And until we build up more unrestricted sources of money, it will always be that way.
Hi, thank you. That was really interesting. I was really interested in the way in which all of you referred to language, both spoken language, but also the language of bureaucracy as being barriers to your specific organizations. And you all use languages of engagement in really different and interesting ways. So given that you also have to work together across the panel as well as with other communities, I'd love to hear a bit more specific stuff about how each of you negotiates and deals with those differences. What are the practical strategies that you work with in order to get over or acknowledge the tensions of those languages and work through them?
I'm happy to go first. Well, I mean, right off the bat, you heard me off the bat. I don't like the title. I mean, I understand it has a purpose and it's taken me a long time in life to understand it has a purpose and a value to some people in some situations in a positive way. They want a counselor there, right? But in the real world of community development and organizing and social change, it's a huge barrier, and I try and make sure that that's clear off the front. And I think we all kind of need to think about that in our titles and what we're kind of bringing into any given space, right? I do, so Stephen and I'm the counselor liaison to the Urban Aboriginal Advisory, or People's Advisory Committee, UAPAC. I sit on one of the Vancouver Foundation's advisory committees. I did a lot of work with Matt Hearn and the Purple Thistle. Iris and I haven't done as much work together, but City of Vancouver is a major funder of one of the projects that PeerNet is working on. So, we do all work together in some ways, and probably there's many other cross connections. It's a tough question for me to answer. I didn't go to university. I rent. I grew up low income. I'm a woman. Most of my activism was when I was, I started, when I was 3, but I was heavily in the trenches on activism at 13, 14. And in that situation where you're a low income woman, I left home at 13 and lived on the street, so quite marginalized, right? You really learn to listen to what other people are saying, both for your own survival, but also because nobody's listening to you. So you've got plenty of time to observe. So I think it's a bit about the way you are in the world, right? I think it's more challenging if, I don't want to, I don't know how far down. I have been in places where I have noticed that people aren't as observant about the space they're taking up in a room, and that makes it very challenging.
Sorry, I'll just, in terms of language itself, I think that just like we've seen movements change, and like when I was talking about the civic youth strategy and how there's been lots of change around youth engagement in the city of Vancouver, the language is constantly shifting as well. And I think that the more we have those opportunities to come together and create shared definitions. For instance, I went to Embrace BC put on a anti-racism conference a couple of months ago, and I started off doing anti-racism work as a teenager, and when I went to conferences then, they weren't using power and privilege. They weren't identifying like their own identities of how they had privilege. But now, holy smokes, I was so blown away. And this is 10 years ago that they had their last conference. And so here I am listening to somebody identify their privilege in a space where 10 years ago they weren't doing that. So there has been change, but I think that we're constantly having to push that change for language. And it's so great that we do have funders who listen to community needs and are so aware of the trends that are constantly changing in our communities to become more inclusive. And how do we change our language to be more inclusive? So I hope that helped answer.
And when it comes to the advisory committee with bureaucratic language, we're lucky enough to have a staff clerk there to tell us how we should say it. So that helps when we're making official motions. But what I have noticed is going to different circles with and discussion is that there is a sense that we all do use different languages, and it's acknowledged that if you need to ask, you ask, and you have that discussion on what is the appropriate language to use at that time. And that's a big part of I think, engaging diverse communities is about making sure that each community understands what you've come together to discuss, and you take that time to also just talk about language in general.
Yeah, I think there's an aspect of kind of mutual understanding that really would make this process the most useful it could be. And I think that, it seems like we're on our way there. I feel like historically, nonprofits have tried to figure out whatever they can say to get money. What are the buzzwords that are current right now? What are grantors going to pay for? I think having a communication is best when it's a two-way thing. So I really look forward to having granting agencies that listen. I think we're pretty fortunate in this city, and I think that moving that direction, is a good thing.
It's a great question, and so I've spoken. I think it's easier for us to work with grant seekers, and thank you for acknowledging that we, in fact, are pretty good listeners. The challenge for us working with grant seekers around social change is the pace of as a community foundation funder, the pace of social change is way ahead of the language of the money that we're dealing with. That's one of our challenges. The other challenge is working with funders. And so before I became a grant maker, I was a grant seeker. I worked for 20 years in nonprofit health charities. And one of our frustrations was always, why can't the funders get together and just work together? And so this year, Vancouver Foundation, City of Vancouver, Vancouver Coastal Health, United Way of Lower Mainland, we all got together and said, let's work together and make it easier for grant seekers to get our money. Why are there 4 applications? Why are there 4 different reports? Why are we doing 4 different granting cycles? Surely we can just all come to an agreement. And I adore the people on that working committee. I have a lot of respect for them. And guess what? We're no farther ahead than we were when we started. For very good, not very good, for very practical reasons. We're all accountable to different people. The City of Vancouver is accountable to the residents of the city, and the residents and the governance structure and the auditing structure to keep the city accountable is different than the United Way's structure and is different than a public health authority structure. And so we have a duty to report and show impact back to the people we're accountable for. And when those are all different things, it makes collaboration so much more difficult. And so it's far more easy for us to collaborate with grant seekers than it is for us to collaborate with other funders. And that's wrong.
Thank you so much. I just want to acknowledge the time and energy that was spent for all of you who took the time to be here tonight, because I think that burnout is real, right? Those of us who are activists and doing advocacy work, which is why this is my second wine here. And my question to you is not a completely selfless one around grant writing, and I have to write a lot of grants, and sometimes as I'm writing it, I just realize that I'm repeating a lot of the same things over and over again and regurgitating a lot of the same concepts and theories, and just want to piggyback on the comment around language. And all of you kind of touched upon the language that we're used to engage social justice and social change. So my unselfless, well, my not completely selfless question, which is to you, how can we change up the language? How can we engage you to make it more interesting for you to read and for us to write when we're doing activist work? And it's a challenging thing to navigate the space of negotiating with the system that pits us against one another as marginalized communities, and pits us against one another to compete for the same fund and for the same money, right?
You want the funder to go first? No. My advice has always been to grant seekers: keep your voice authentic. Never change your voice to match our language. You may not get our grant, but you will. We're not the only funder in town. And one of the heartbreaking things I see grant seekers do, and I did myself as a grant seeker, was consult with the community and the members that I worked with, give an authentic voice to a self-directed, determined need, map out a course of action, and then change that entirely to match what a funder said they were looking for. Because once we did that, we weren't being true to the people we were working with and the cause we were trying to change, and we weren't being true to the funder. And so, as soon as those words leave my mouth, I know how stupid it sounds. Of course you have to make your proposal sound like it aligns with what the funder is looking for. But don't go too far. If you're really changing your authentic voice to match ours, we're not the funder to come to. There are other options to explore, and we'll help you do that. We won't get ahead in social change by trying to articulate that change in the voice that we think people want to hear.
One of the great things is about relationships is go to the funder and talk to them, right? We actually, I will have to say that we're in a really awesome position as well, because right now the Vancouver Coastal Health Smart Fund is looking at the way that they have us reporting as well as applying for grants. And so they're trying to make it more simple. And we're piloting a project right now where they're looking at and they're taking cross sections of their grantees and trying to figure out a way that we can all report in the same way so that they can get their outcomes out and grant in or receive their applications in the same way as well. And I think that the City of Vancouver and Vancouver Coastal Health and Vancouver Foundation have all been talking about, well, let's take a look at, so you're not totally behind, like you're just a little step ahead, because we are going through that process right now as PeerNet. So we're providing that feedback around what works for us. And it's so great that there's now an opportunity to also talk about stories. So we're getting stories from folks who participate in our programs or in our training, and we're able to share those stories, because I think that those stories are more impactful oftentimes than the numbers, like how many people did we provide training for? Well, that can give you so much, but really looking at the quality of the training that we provide is probably more important than the quantity of people that we're actually hitting. So.
Oh boy, so I'm sitting here sort of struggling because I have that city councillor title next to my name, but I'm going to give you an answer just from an Andrea perspective. And telling you that it's mostly informed by, I convene a nonprofit. We had an executive team model, so technically was titled executive director, but it was more of a convening role for 10 years. And we went from 25% grant funding when I started down to about 2%, but grew our budget by over $2 million in that time. So the sort of punchline of that is that you can sort of tell where I am on grant funding. I do think it is, and I sit as an advisor to the Vancouver Foundation, so I do think there's a very critical role for granting institutions, but I think there's also a very critical role for nonprofits and community organizations to question who they're there to serve, and if you can't organize those people in a way, and this isn't, sorry, I'm not like you, Jen, can't organize them, but I mean, if we as a community can't organize them in a way well enough that they can provide some level of volunteer, financial, and appreciating that not every community, I mean, I'm not talking that they're going to put up 100%, but some level of support, then who the hell are we speaking on behalf of, right, as a nonprofit? So that was really where we came to in our organization and really felt that we'd become something of a direct mail organization and needed to build that constituency support. And once we let go of the concept of what we realized is we were squishing these words into these boxes. We were getting money, which was half of what we needed to do the project that we didn't want to do because that's what the funder wanted, you know, and it was just, you talk about burnout. We were just like, forget it, we've had enough. And trying to write a report that reflected, you know, we were working in First Nations communities and with the provincial government that changed its mind every hour. And like, there was no way we could deliver on these outcomes that we had said, you know, our best guess here. You've all been there, right? So we just let go of it, and essentially would only take grants from organizations that approached us and said, "We love the work you're doing. How much do you need?" Like, and I know that sounds like a dream, but they actually are out there. And when you sort of self-empower, that happens. I also am going to say, and I can't really tell you what goes on in the advisory committee, but I can tell you in a broad sense that there's myself and there's certainly a number of other people that I've observed are quite more likely to provide support to organizations that are very clear about what their core strengths are, what their core needs that they're meeting are, and how this program will meet it, than how well it meets into the box. So I would say that courage is not, it's not dumb or uninformed, right? It's worth having that courage, because Vancouver Foundation really needs to be commended for how much it brings the community into those decisions, and it's the community that gets as frustrated with writing grants as the community, the grant seekers that we're trying to serve, right?
And giving feedback can also be extremely frustrating. So be patient. Like we're finding it very, very difficult because we don't always fit what other organizations that are funded can provide, like their statistical information, all that kind of stuff. And so we're finding it really frustrating and hard to figure out where we fit in being able to provide that information. But it's something that needs to be done, and it's at least good that there's that process for feedback.
Sorry, I did forget one point. It is a bit why I took off my counselor hat. Really, like, at a basic level, you need, especially, like, no more true than for marginalized communities, you have to elect governments that make that work a core function of government. It's insane that we pay taxes and then have to pay a nonprofit to do work that is created because a government can't or won't enact certain social policies. And I know my own government is guilty of not enacting or doing things. So and when you are a charity and you're dependent on these charitable grants, you can't organize people in the community to be involved in elections. And there's nothing more important than that in terms of transformative social change. So that would be my last plug.
Just while we're on government, let me preface this by saying Andrea and I work very well together, and I'm delighted that she's on our advisory committee. She brings a great deal of value there. Where we are positioned as a funder is upfront. We're an incubator. So we provide money for the R&D that nonprofits typically haven't put aside, don't have the luxury to put aside, to develop new relationships, develop new ideas, develop new products and services. So we're in the new and innovative sphere. We're not in the core operating sphere, because for the longest period of time, that's where government was. Government wasn't in new and innovative. They were in ongoing core operating. And then the rules changed at all levels of government. And suddenly an observation I've made is governments really want to get into new and innovative. They want to do short-term projects. And so I recognize that new and innovative eventually becomes tried and true. That's what we're, really, that's what we're hoping. Your new and innovative project will become tried and true. But we don't fund tried and true. And someone needs to. And I think there's an opportunity for funders across sectors to come to the table to say we can't all be in the new and innovative sphere of funding. Someone also needs to support tried and true.
Dave, may I ask, in your bringing together those 4 funders, is that happening?
Is that still on? So we didn't... Well, it's actually, what a great question. Thank you for bringing that up. City of Vancouver and Vancouver Coastal Health, for the most part, are still ongoing operating. United Way and Vancouver Foundation are much more on the new and innovative. So our discussion really wasn't about carving out turf. It was about, regardless of what funding sphere we're in, how can we make it easier for grant seekers to apply and report back? And we're not very far along there. Sorry.
I appreciate the effort.
I was just wondering if any of you would like to comment on something that I've perceived to be a difficulty, which is that enacting social change means that you have to look for things to change. And I think a lot of the people in any community who would be most impacted or who are most needing things to change are often people who have the least hope that anything will change. And so those would be the people that you want to hear your ideas for change from, and yet those are in every group. I mean, I belong to a union, and I just, even within my own union, I think about how many of my fellow, dues-paying members feel that it's a useless organization, that it has nothing to offer them, and there's a level of disaffection where you can't even get ideas for change from people that you would like to change for. So that's kind of where my question is coming from, but I wonder how do you, in the work that you do in the organizations that you have, how do you go about seeking out the kind of change that people actually want when they don't really believe that you'll ever change for them?
That's actually one of the issues that I've been dealing with as well when we're looking at doing a community engagement with the urban Aboriginal peoples to figure out what it is that we can advise back to City Council on how can we make the city a better place in any regard of the term. And what I've found so far is that we haven't officially done any of our own forums, but attending other discussions is that it tends to be a place for people to vent their issues. And I've just found that people in most when you give them a time to speak, that's what comes to the surface. So what we're working with, and we're looking to do some of our community forums with Reconciliation Canada, actually, because they're doing a big event in September, and they came to present to us. We asked to work with them for the next 9 months on community engagement. But what we're looking at is we're looking future thinking, and that's really where my hope is that we'll be able to keep that conversation positive. We'll be able to ask the right questions onto what needs to happen. And one of the questions that I want to be asking throughout the city is, what's working? What's working in small pockets, and how can we recreate that in another pocket in the city, or how can we expand upon that? And I think that's really imperative, is asking the right questions, first of all, instead of just having a floor and a space for people to talk about what they want to talk about. But we are forward-thinking in that. And we felt that working with Reconciliation Canada was a perfect opportunity for that, because the idea of the word is not only about accepting what happened in the past, but how do we work together as citizens and as a society to move forward. And that's what Reconciliation Canada is trying to look at. It's not only about residential schools or whatever happened in the past. It's about, how does the Aboriginal person take their place in society? How are they recognized? And how do we work together in all groups, in all peoples, and be able to move forward in a good way. And but yeah, I'd say it's about asking the right questions first.
I think that anybody who is in the face of a very gigantic problem is going to feel powerless, and is going to feel in some senses hopeless and not really know what to do. I don't think it's necessarily this idea of like the most marginalized. I think like even looking at myself, like I want to fix, colonialism and climate change, and I feel a bit of hopelessness in the face of those sorts of problems because they're so big I can't comprehend them. So I feel like when you talk to marginalized people and say, how can we fix these giant things, of course that's how they're going to respond, just like any of us would. So I guess the thing I would start with is small, like immediate actual changes in the quality of life for people. It doesn't have to be this whole grand sweeping revolutionary change. It's, sometimes it just means eating breakfast or something like that. It's like those sorts of things. Start small is what I would say. And don't stop.
For us, it's about being an ally and knowing what that means. It means going into communities and observing if needed, right? Don't say anything. Be there and hear and witness. Allow space for those voices to happen. Go to places where you might be uncomfortable. Go to Occupy and see what's messed up with Occupy, and go to some of the other things that are learn more about Idle No More. And be there as an ally. You don't need to say anything. You just need to listen.
Social change and innovation are important catalysts and are one tool in the toolbox, but they're not the answer to everything. Sometimes change isn't needed. Sometimes just improvement is needed, or stability is needed. The biggest change can sometimes just be stability. And so I think as change agents, as a funder or as an activist, we need to be cautious about not pushing our desire for change on every situation. Sometimes we need to also be reflective, and I agree with Iris, listen to see the context that people are really looking for. Social change often leaves people behind. Helps some people along, leaves others behind. And going back to the context about living in the gay village in Toronto in the 1990s, gays and lesbians were coming together for the first time in that city to really work on an issue and work together. That was a really interesting, dynamic social change. And then that expanded to gays, lesbians, and bisexuals. And suddenly many people struggled with, well, wait a minute, why is that circle expanding? Now it's the LMNOP. And that social change left others behind because people were saying, well, other than not being straight, where's our commonality? And now we're up to queer. And I got to say, I'm really struggling with fitting in in that queer identity. I'm about as not queer, I think, as... Sorry. I try sometimes. But just... So there's a real potential for social change to help some people move along and leave other people behind. And we really need to be conscientious about that as well.
It's a provocative question, obviously. I don't think it's our job to bring people along. I don't think it's our job to put people on committees. I don't think it's our job to do a whole whack of stuff other than be authentic humans in that moment, right? And I mean that in the most basic of ways. Vancouver Foundation did I really did not go to university, but I spent enough time around academics now that I speak in this research language. So Vancouver Foundation did this great research on belonging and inclusion. And, I've spent, basically the reason I ran for city council goes back 20 years to just wanting a few friends to vote. Like, I couldn't understand why they wouldn't go to the polls. And it led to this long process, and I put all this energy into trying to engage people in government. And then the Vancouver Foundation does this research that says, hey, guess what? If you're not engaged in your community with your neighbor, there's no way the first thing you're going to do is go to a city council meeting and speak at a public hearing or even vote. Like, if you're not connecting with other humans, why would you make your first choice connecting with the federal government at an Enbridge hearing or whatever it is, right, or at a union meeting? So I think in every room like this, there's somebody here who comes from a community that we would be surprised by, but we don't support those people. We don't give them a voice. We don't. At your union meetings, I'm sure there's someone there who actually is very connected to the disaffected, but nobody knows that. Nobody's providing any support. No one's providing any space for them. And that really, it is about that conscientious moment, right? Really finding that person in the room and figuring out how you make space for them to feel empowered in that room in that moment, because that's what's most likely to lead to them going to their friends and saying, I had an awesome experience at that union meeting or that whatever event, right?
Just to piggyback on what Andrea was saying in terms of like how we're not making space, and just in terms of like the setup of this room, in terms of like where the panelists are located and where the audiences are located, and how the power dynamics that's inherent within the structure of who's the experts up in the front and who's the audience, and those who are supposed to ask questions. And it's all meaningful, absolutely. I learned so much from just being here tonight. Granted, I had 2 glasses of wine, so. But what I'm saying is that I think that we need to I like what you said about radicalizing things a little bit, right? Like, change the space, change the setup, right? Form a circle where there's no hierarchy that's inherent and set up to, once again, pit us against one another and perpetuate the power dynamics that's already existing here and everywhere and all between us, right? So, just gonna go for it. And we're talking about privilege and power. Like, I want to sit by Iris and move a little bit closer to her, because I believe fundamentally that we all have voices to contribute, and if we're not giving the platform, especially in the setup, right, in the structure that's in a space, like where are we located, downtown, Gastown, where are these chairs facing, like who are you facing, like these are such important questions to think about, but we don't think about because that's the experiences that we grew up in school, right? We learned from our teachers, our elders. And those are great voices because they have experience, but we also have experiences that we can bring value and meaningfulness into the picture. I'm going to pass it to Iris because I know she knows what I'm talking about.
But other people do too. So if there's anybody else that wants to, I've said a ton, so I'm going to...
I'm an educator, and right now I'm teaching a course on social inequalities. And so to kind of mess with the dynamic of expert and student, yeah, sure, for the students that really want to, they have graduate school in their sites and whatnot. They can do an academic research project proposal. But I've also made an option to do a community project proposal. And I think that actually... I haven't read them yet. The mini proposals are coming in tonight. But I think it's about 65 or 70% of the 50 students enrolled in the course are actually going the community project route. which I'm actually very excited about. And when the question was posed about, why am I here tonight? And part of it was the drive to know what is happening in Vancouver, what community groups are, what kind of community engagement can I bring or build or even just mess with in the classroom so that the students that are, signed up for 13 weeks can then take something and go and do it, right? And so what I want to know, and this is a bit selfish too, is from the panelists and maybe other folks who are here, what is the thing that I can take from this moment and bring back to the classroom? Because I have 50 students that are excited. They're on this journey with me, talking about power and privilege and what that looks like in terms of social inequality, and then what can we do about it. And I feel really excited that a lot of students have chosen the community path, and I want to engage that. And so what message can I take from here tonight and bring back to the classroom?
Thank you. First of all, thank you to all the panelists for all your time and sharing what your organizations do. And for me, it's really interesting hearing about engaging diverse community voices, but it's all about social change, right? And so what I'd like to hear from you is where this has been effective in making social change. So if you're writing your annual report tomorrow, what is your proudest moment in terms of making actual social change? So if you have one thing to write about, what would it be?
For PeerNet, over the last little while, because we've been involved with a project called Citizen U, which is an anti-discrimination research action project for young people in the city of Vancouver. We've had tons of young people who have come, and we've actually been partnering with Vancouver Foundation because Vancouver Foundation has been giving small chunks of money to these young people who are amazing leaders and wanting to do something in their communities. And unfortunately, they don't have a place where they can put this money into. And so PeerNet's been able to support them by holding their money and helping them and build their capacity around budgeting and project management. And then they go out, and we don't take any of their money. We make sure that we give it all back, and they learn to invoice, they learn all of that stuff. And that's one of the ways for us that we feel we've been able to affect social changes by supporting the young people in doing that and building their capacity and being able to support them in their projects.
Just wanted to touch base on what she said just before that. One of the questions that always arises that I always ask is how can we get more people out to dialogues or to just participate in community events. And I think it's really interesting. I see this invisible barrier in Vancouver because of the way that we have the planning and this within just the structure of Vancouver and where people live is that we're really living on top of each other. And so I'm born and raised in Vancouver, and I've always seen this, and I spent some time in Calgary for a job, and out there, people are friendly. People will say hi to you when you're walking down the street, and you don't see that in Vancouver. I think it's because we are stacked on top of each other, and we see people all the time, is that we try to distance ourselves from other people around. And I think that's one of the things that I don't have, an answer for your class, but I think a question is how do we break down that barrier, that invisible barrier of not wanting to see people all the time, because I think, I personally, I get sick and tired of people as well, just walking down the street because you're running into people all over the place. And just in comparison to Calgary, where it's so spread out and you live so far away from each other, I found that you had to go out of your way to go and see someone, so relationships were built a lot stronger. And where in Vancouver, you see these relationships and you can cycle through, you know there's always going to be another person there. So I think we have to start to also get to know our neighbors. And I think that comes down to it as well, is that because of that living so close together, we don't even know who we're living next to. And that's going to be part of how we see social change and see community engagement is actually starting to engage with just on a small local level.
I need to intervene in the time, actually, just because we're closing in on the being kicked out of the room. So I think actually Stephen's point is a great note to end on. I'm sorry, Natalie.
Can I make a small comment, though?
Very quickly.
Very quickly. So it won't be a question, but just to have in mind that, like logistically, the event, how it happened. I know people were speaking about, the logistics of having you there and us here, but also thinking about who got to ask questions and who didn't. And it's not that I'm upset because I didn't get to ask it. I'm sure I'll go up to Andrea and ask the question that I want to ask, and that will be okay. But just that of who takes a space when we go to events like this, and where we are about the makeup of the room is that not everybody who got well represented in speaking in asking questions. So I just wanted to put that out there. I know you have to run out of here and we're going to get kicked out soon, but I just wanted for us to think when we go to community events about who's taking space and who's getting to ask questions and getting to speak a lot. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, and thank you to Jen for the comment about structure. As a geographer, I should think about that. But you will notice that in the next Policy in a Pint, when I, come up with the next topic. And I'm very much welcome ideas for that. So I would like to use the opportunity that Stephen offered of getting to know one's neighbors, use the last few minutes of our time here, and kind of encourage you to meet someone you didn't know. Thank you so much for coming out tonight, and thank you again to the panelists for their time.
Thank you.